The Decision Center for a Desert City is engaged in water resources research to better understand the implications of different water management policies on the future of water sustainability and what impact external factors such as climate change or drought have on the management of water sustainability. To conduct this research, DCDC created a regional water supply and demand model for the different geographies in the West, including the Phoenix region. Part of DCDC's research includes education on water resource issues. To expand the opportunities to teach students about water resources using a water supply and demand model, we developed web-based interfaces for our different geographic research models to make it easy for people to actually use the model in a classroom setting. We received a grant from the Arizona Community Foundation to reach out to teachers within the region to help you utilize this web app within your classroom environment and to help you teach your students about water resources, but also about possible STEM activities that the model helps direct. Water supply, availability, and demand, usage, need to be managed to provide enough water to maintain a sustainable region. This includes water for agricultural production, riverine or riparian habitats, human health and comfort, and commercial and industrial production. For our first challenge scenario, climatic conditions have remained fairly constant since 2015, but population growth has continued. And in 2050, water demand exceeds supply. If more water is used than is present in existing ground and surface water reserves, then the system is unsustainable. All of the outputs, such as agriculture, river habitats, human use, and economic use, take out more than inputs can provide. Follow the lesson plan for information on grouping students. The WaterSim model can be used from different perspectives. Depending on your stakeholder group, you are more or less likely to make different water policy choices. With the goal of managing the water supply until 2050, the model can be used to simulate the outcomes of certain policy choices. Instead of just telling the students who we chose as representative stakeholder groups for this lesson plan, you can start them out with a brainstorm activity about the general groups that would have an interest in water management for this part of Arizona. For this lesson, we chose 4 unique stakeholder groups with somewhat definable characteristics and viewpoints. It is important to keep in mind that these stakeholder profiles are for the purpose of this learning activity and are not intended to profile actual people, groups, or organizations. Actual people are much more complex, with ever-changing viewpoints, which may overlap several of these profiles. Each profile is broken into 3 sections. Key points describe the general water use for your stakeholder group. Concerns describe your stakeholder group's views on possible trade-offs. Discussion questions prompt additional conversation that can help frame and define the perspective of your stakeholder group. For step 1, students get together with their groups to discuss the needs of that stakeholder and then create a list of goals for water management that would directly benefit them. Step 2 corresponds to the student worksheet and focuses students on the policy choices that can be managed through the WaterSim Arizona model. This screenshot of WaterSim Phoenix shows the initial settings for policy choices and sustainability indicators. Students manipulate these policy choices. Their worksheet includes a chart for reporting 2 scenarios and then their consensus. They can use a separate sheet of paper if they need to run additional scenarios before coming to a consensus. The sustainability of community water systems may be evaluated using indicators. The 5 indicators presented here represent the state of community values toward water supply and use. Each indicator represents a different aspect of water sustainability, but what is considered sustainable may vary from person to person. The current sustainability indicator results are marked in each box, with the previous setting below each box. This image shows the indicators at the initial policy settings, thus the parentheses tell us that there was no setting before this one. Clicking on each image in WaterSim will give you additional information. This demonstrates the percentage of the total water that must be satisfied through groundwater pumping. A safe yield of groundwater is generally around 11 to 12%. This means that ideally no more than 11 to 12% of the total water would come from groundwater. For some communities, including many Native American communities, agricultural entities, and municipal water providers, groundwater is their only source of water. But for communities with access to surface water supplies, groundwater can act as a buffer, providing a reserve supply when other supplies are scarce. Pumping less groundwater now leaves more groundwater available for future use during drought or emergencies when surface water supplies are reduced. Thus, decreasing the amount of groundwater pumped increases the sustainability of the water supply. Ask students to consider how their stakeholder feels about the current percentage of water that is coming from groundwater. Do they believe it should be less? Does their stakeholder care? The Environment Sustainability Indicator reports the percentage of the amount of Colorado River water estimated as necessary to sustain the Colorado River Delta that is being met by the simulation. A 2012 binational agreement for the Colorado River Basin committed 158,088 acre-feet of water over a 5-year period, modeled annually here, for restoring the delta. Arizona is responsible for a proportion of this water, and the indicator will reflect the percentage of Arizona's commitment to environmental flows for this delta that are being met. However, in low flow years, there may not be enough water left over for the environment after satisfying municipal and agricultural needs. Because Arizona's proportion of the total flow stays constant in this model, the indicator also shows the percentage of committed flows satisfied by the entire Colorado River Basin. Ask students to consider their stakeholders' perspective on this indicator. Would their stakeholders be satisfied? The Agriculture Sustainability Indicator represents the amount of agricultural production as a percentage of the 2015 estimate. Since this indicator measures the percent change from 2015, the amount of water needed to produce a generic crop rather than specific crops is used. Please note that the value presented represents the 2050 estimate. The number here means that the amount of agricultural production is 81% of what it was in 2015, and there was a reduction in agricultural production. The sustainability indicator shows gallons per capita per day, which is the average number of gallons used by a person in the community per day. Per capita means per person. The population sustainability indicator measures the number of years following the simulation that the water supply can support the current population before they would experience water deficits or have to find additional water supplies at higher costs. Simply put, this indicator represents the number of years of water supply the last house built in 2050 has before it runs out of water from current water sources. Factors influencing this indicator are consumption, GPCD, and population size. Based on the Comprehensive Groundwater Management Act of 1980, municipal water providers within an active management area must demonstrate an adequate water supply, meaning physical or legal access to a 100-year supply of water. There are 4 different types of output graphs: supply, or water availability; demand, water used; reservoir rivers, water coming from surface water supplies; sustainability, which is a graphical representation of the sustainability indicators. There's also a tab for inputs. Students do not need to use this tab until Part 3 and should not manipulate the numbers on this tab until that time. Students are trying to get the most positive results for the stakeholders they represent. Students may record their results on their worksheet or save the report as a PDF. This last part of Step 2 asks student groups to review these questions and present a 2 to 3 minute summary of their stakeholder group results. In Part 2, your students will create new groups where each student represents their stakeholder group to discuss water management choices and trade-offs of all stakeholders and collaboratively make new goals for water management.